Peter, welcome to my bookstore's first author interview. I'm so pleased and excited to be chatting with someone from halfway across the globe in Australia. Thanks for waking up and starting your day talking sci-fi.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be on Pockmarked from the Stars. I guess this is from the other side of the world, but we're all facing the same star.
It's that globalization at its finest, cutting across geographic boundaries virtually. So Peter, I'm just going to jump right into it. I've read hundreds of sci-fi books, and I recently stumbled across Through Ezekiel, and I fell in love with it. I crushed it in a couple of days. I have to admit, I love the audiobook too. And I'm very serious when I say this, that it's one of my favorite recent sci-fi books. So I'm a first contact sucker. So I wanted to ask you, because I've taken some notes on what you've said about why you're like gravitating towards first contact. Can you tell me a little bit why you seem to kind of, book after book, kind of play with some of these really fun themes around first contact?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating possibility, and I do think that it's just a matter of time. A lot of people will say, "Is there life out there? Is there life in outer space?" But the very question itself misses the point that we already know the answer. The answer to the question, "Is there life in outer space?" is yes, because that's where we are. Earth is, it might only be one example, but it is an amazing example of how life can flourish in outer space. We sort of have this Earth-centric view of ourselves where we think of here as the be-all and end-all, and the stars are just these faint dots in the distance. And the reality is the reverse. The universe is unfathomable in size. There's I think it's something like a sextillion of stars out there. There's at least 200 billion galaxies that we know of, and
Those are the kind of numbers that are so big that people can't grasp them.
yeah,
It's
and
just so
we're here
immense.
on one little tiny world. The prospect of there not being any other life out there is almost zero. We are the best evidence that life can thrive in outer space. It's just a question of what other life is out there, what form does it take, and can we observe it? Can we interact with it? Can we communicate with it? Can we even have first contact where it comes together? And of course, this has been a staple of science fiction for, just hundreds of years. You go back as far as even some of the philosophers dreamed of things like this. And then you get to the likes of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and they all interpret the idea of contact through a human lens. And so, it's sort of envisioned almost, as leading to war, because we're a very warlike species. And so that has sort of spawned our modern understanding of first contact, which is very much, aliens are evil, and, they're coming to steal our water and all this sort of stuff. And I try to peel that back a little and go, actually, what reason would an alien have for coming to Earth? And
Absolutely.
it wouldn't be to steal our water. It wouldn't be to enslave us. But we have something that's incredibly precious here. We have something that's more rare than the rarest of metals. We value gold and platinum and uranium and all that sort of stuff. But we have life, and that is so unique. We know it, at least ourselves, looking outward, because we haven't been able to see anyone else yet. That it would make sense for aliens to visit Earth just to experience and study and interact with the life we have here and the intelligent life that we have. And so that's sort of just one of the underlying themes behind a lot of the books.
So I was going to read off like my own little blurb, my own description, but one of the things I want to make sure, because there's so many sci-fi books out there that sometimes people get lost in the shuffle and you just have the same conversation over and over. Have you read Dune? You got to read Dune before the movie. And I was wondering if you could give your 30-second pitch, or just like your one sentence, like we all have a publisher blurb, but like how would you describe the hook to Ezekiel? Did I say that right?
Yeah. It's asking an author who normally works with 100,000 words to compress something down to 100 is like torture.
That's right. Cut all the limbs off your child. Let's see how small you can get it. That's dark and fairly appropriate for this time of year, but go ahead.
But with 3 Ezekiel, all books sort of have inciting incidents and sort of underlying concepts behind them. And one of the concepts behind 3 Ezekiel is the idea of sample return. And that's something we're starting to hear a bit about now, and we're going to hear a lot more about over the next decade. So Haibusha, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but the Haibusha Japanese space probe visited several comets and has returned samples of those comets to Earth.
Which, when you just hit pause and you think about that, it's unbelievable. All of the groveling, all the ridiculousness, Facebook and Instagram are down today. We did that. As a species, we did that, and it's remarkable. But I cut you off. Keep going.
Oh, yeah. And the astonishing thing about that mission is, fuel is incredibly precious in space. So they have to calculate their orbits decades ahead of time on how to do flybys. And they've actually managed multiple flybys. So they've done one, taken samples, whizzed by Earth, dropped it off as they shot past on their way to their next sample gathering activity, which is just amazing. Coming up in probably 2030, 2032, there's going to be the Mars sample return project. And the current Perseverance rover is collecting samples, drilling, storing them in containers that are going to be collected and then eventually returned to Earth. So we're very much, as a species, as we've grown through space flight, we've wanted to bring samples back. We've brought samples back from the moon. And so 3 Ezekiel sort of says, well, what would happen if an alien civilization light years away detected that there was life on Earth? One thing they would do is they would want a sample return mission of their own. They would send some sort of spaceship. It would more than likely be automated, just because the sheer distance involved makes it very difficult to have a crewed ship. And it would come here and it would want to collect samples and take them back.
Sure.
So we're on the receiving end of a sample return mission. And that was the conceit upon which the book was then built. And then, of course, it unfolds in the African jungle, and there's a space elevator used, and then, the different factions on Earth start arm wrestling with each other, and so you get this great tension and this great conflict as humanity is struggling to understand what's happening, but we're on the receiving end of one of these sample return missions. So to me, that's interesting science fiction, because it's based on plausible reality, the sort of things that would happen. And the mission in 3 Ezekiel would have been launched before. It could have been launched when the Romans were around. It could have been launched when the Egyptians were building the pyramids. That they would have had no way of knowing that there was an intelligent spacefaring species here, because at the point they launched, there wasn't.
Right. No, I love the premise so much, and I think that's a nice little hook. But the thing I got to give you credit for are the characters. But before I go to the characters, I was digging through your blog on your website, and I don't want to be like that person making a video being like, let's talk about aliens and UAPs. But I thought you had some really interesting feedback on it. And I think it ties nicely to 3 Ezekiel, because you just kind of highlighted, sample return. And then we think about these DoD videos, and it looks like a little pill and it's whipping around. And you said at the moment, the odds are that it's either US tech, foreign tech, or simply mistaken sightings. But what if it is a sample return mission? I mean, I'm just curious. I want to prod you on that because I read your whole thing and it's very compelling. But couldn't it also have been a sample return? That was like my first thought. I was like, that, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is an interesting idea. Well, I've got a book coming out in October, so just in a couple of weeks' time, called Cold Eyes, and it has a bit of a sample return element to it as well. But this time, humans are over a planet, and the planet has intelligent life on it, and one of their craft skims the one of the human craft skims the upper atmosphere because they're looking to make contact, and they're looking to understand, and they're also looking to get evidence of life. And you can actually get fragments of life, you know, as high as 100,000 meters here on Earth, because diatoms and bacteria and things like this just get blown up by storms and things like this.
Okay.
So yeah, so the sample return element of science fiction is something that hasn't been explored, and even sort of UFO sightings, it is a very real possibility because you could get tremendous samples about human life, about Earth life, and understand a massive amount from us just from retrieving a single bacterium.
Sure.
And that's because bacteria, like us, uses DNA as the basis of life, and DNA is what is common to all life on Earth. But to go back to the UAP alien sighting thing, as a science fiction author, it's of course incredibly tempting to jump in and go, yes, yes, yes. And I've even got a book about it. I've got a book called Feedback, which is about UFOs. But the pragmatist in me and the realist in me says, we're seeing what we want to see.
Sure.
You know, it's
Wouldn't
like,
it be convenient when the world's kind of collapsing in on itself, and fascism and, you know, miscorrection and all miscommunication and all that, you know, it'd be convenient to have a new little plot twist like that, right?
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that would have made 2020 just over the top, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I don't think the simulation would have broken. No. But what I was gonna go ahead.
For those that haven't, aren't up on the debate, these US fighter pilots have seen, things they can't explain, and there's some footage floating around and things like this. The challenge is when you test the idea, when you push the idea to sort of look to see how much it holds. I can go in the forest and look at a tree, and in the outline of the bark, see the image of the Virgin Mary or Jesus or something like that. Our eyes are trained to
it's more often
read into
toast,
things.
but yes.
Yeah. And with the sightings, one of the key issues is that there's not really corroborating evidence. So to give you some idea, the US Air Force has a massive program tracking debris in orbit, and can track things as small as a nut, moving at 27,000 kilometers an hour in orbit, that's come off some Russian booster 30 years ago. So we have astonishing visibility of what's happening there. And this is using ground-based radars that are of immense size. We can throw all our computing power at it. We can throw all our technology at it. Of course, from a defense perspective, there's a massive motivation there, because you want to understand if there are spy satellites, if there's first launch, so there's an incredible there. So, that an F-16 or an F-18, with a much smaller, tinier, tracking radar can pick something up. All these other things, all these ground-based ones can't. Just sort of says, well, that's an outlier. We really need to look at what other possibilities are there. And
well, I think you're sucking the fun out of what we all believe is aliens. No, I'm just kidding. All right, rapid fire question, quick response. Let's see. When I think of first contact novels, I've only read one of yours, so I'm now going to think of Three Zico. But I think of Blind Sight by Peter Watts. That's like a big fan favorite. Mote in God's Eye, I read that for the first time this year. Rendezvous with Rama, Big Dumb Object, or is it? No. And let's see, Childhood's End, Contact by Carl Sagan, Dawn by Octavia Butler, Semiosis. Have you read Semiosis by Sue Bird?
No, I haven't.
Ooh, it's
I'll
one of
have
my
to
absolute
check that out.
favorites. It's got, I'm not going to give away anything. I strongly recommend. It's not every day we look at other types of sentience. But anyways, Project Hail Mary was a big one that people have eaten up over the last 12 months. My
Yeah.
personal favorite, Pushing Ice, Alastair Reynolds.
Oh, I love that book.
It's hard to give that book to someone and them not be like, wow. So we're on the same page on big, wild ideas. What is you kind of already answered this question, but do you have a first contact novel? It might have been the first time you got introduced to the idea, like in a formal or informal way. What's like your first contact novel that's, not one of the ones that you've written?
Oh, it would probably be Solaris by Stanley
Oh,
Lewis.
yeah.
Yeah, just conceptually brilliant. And another favorite would be Sphere by Michael Crichton.
Okay. I've seen the movie. I love Solaris by Stanislaw Lem's book is amazing. I like the movie. I have not read his book though, the Sphere book though.
The book, the sort of the third act is a little filler, lots of stuff thrown in, but the overall premise, the execution, the ending, really, really good.
Okay.
It's definitely one of my favorites. It would be my favorite Michael Crichton book for sure.
Okay, another quick question for you. I was looking up on your website and you've got looking up stuff on the internet and trying to wrap my head around it as one of your favorite interests. I want to hear from you. What would be one of your mind-dropping, rabbit internet hole bombs that have gone off that you've recently discovered? Are there anything crazy that you've recently discovered, or has it made its way into your new October release?
Oh, talking about the new October release, Cold Eyes, it's a tribute to the Moten God's Eye, which you mentioned.
Very cool.
So,
okay.
So the Moten God's Eye is
get behind that.
Yeah. The Moten God's Eye is one of my favorite books. I was actually just rereading it again yesterday. And the reason is because as far as science fiction goes, it was really the first book to have a fully fleshed out alien culture that had intricacies. Isaac Asimov had done Foundation, and Arthur C. Clarke had hit it from different angles, but really, this was the first one where there was complexity to the society. There was structure within the society. There were flaws in it. There was, all this sort of messiness that we actually associate with, with life here on Earth. And it kind of captured that, and it echoed things that we've seen on Earth, like Easter Island. When Europeans first found Easter Island, they found these giant heads, and the Easter Island heads, and they were like, "Oh, this is really crazy." And it took like 40, 50 years before someone actually excavated and realized there's a whole statue there. Just most of it is underground. It's been buried by sediment over hundreds and thousands of years. And the fact that Easter Island has no trees, and that was because it just got denuded by the rapidly growing population, and then that wiped the population out. And so the Moten God's Eye was that same sort of thing, where there's these rapid growth, then the culture is destroyed, then it rebuilds, then it destroys itself again, rebuilds. And so it had this cyclical nature that we see with our own civilizations, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Greeks, the Romans. We've just had the rise and fall of these civilizations. So I loved it as a book, and I enjoy writing tribute works where I'll sort of, it'll be an original story, but it's inspired by concepts that inspired me, so to speak. And so Cold Eyes looks at the first human contact with an alien planet. And so there's this world, and it's got 2 intelligent species on it. The world itself, though, is gravitationally bound. So it's actually, the people on that planet are locked in. They cannot get off it.
So okay.
So when
back to cultural development of a people. Okay, I like that.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
So they've got really limited resources. So when you look at, if you look at a rocket sitting on a launch pad, something like the Saturn V, for example, you've got this massive rocket reaching up, 25 stories in height, and it's only the top section that makes it out of orbit. And it's only the very tip that sort of, eventually makes it back with the astronauts.
Sure, sure.
So there's this concept called the rocket equation. And basically it says, every time you add an extra kilo of mass to your rocket, you're going to need more fuel. But the fuel itself is more mass to the rocket. So you get this exponential relationship where you get diminishing returns, and it's harder and harder to put things into orbit. It's one of the reasons why with SpaceX's new Starship rocket, they'll launch that, it'll get into orbit, and then they're going to need 10 more flights to refuel it to get to the moon. It's because it just cannot take that with it, and it's because we're fighting gravity as we're getting off. Yeah. And one of the surprising things about spaceflight is if Earth was just 1.5 times bigger in diameter, we would not be able to get off the surface with a rocket. We would not be able to reach escape velocity. That rocket equation would have just shrunk right down to zero. At the moment, it's
what you're making me think of right now? I'm like 80% into Ian M. Banks' The Algebraists. Have you read that? Yes. There's an alien species in it that has a derivative like insult for any species that is kind of like us, that the gravity well isn't just holding us down, and it calls those people like us squanderers. Because it was easy for us. We squandered our opportunities. They had to fight like hell to get off their stones.
That's right.
So I actually heard that last night. I was like, squanderer. That's an interesting alien pejorative term. Okay. Well, I love that. Okay. So we're talking about cold eyes. I got a question for you. Is there anything more convenient in sci-fi when you're not writing hard sci-fi than like Le Guin's Ansible or Douglas Adams' Babelfish? Like I have so much empathy for authors like yourself that like try to just not create these like super convenient plot tools. Walk me through what that's like, because it has to be so like, there's gotta be times where you're just like, I'm just going to invent an Ansible. I'm just going to make it so there's no delay in communication, or I can immediately talk to aliens when I drop this fish in my ear. Walk me through that.
One of the sort of unwritten, unspoken rules of hard science fiction is you can get away with one weasel point. So for Ender's Game, and that was the Ansible, basically this faster than light communication, and sort of the accepted sort of definition of science fiction is, as long as you've just got one or none, you're sort of hard science fiction. Otherwise, you sort of you're soft sci-fi, almost bordering on fantasy sort of thing. But yeah, it is a challenge for me. The big one is faster than light travel. And it's a staple of Star Wars. In Star Wars, the hilarious thing is, yeah, that's right. And they're doing these jumps between planets and different star systems in what would be essentially a Corvette Stingray to us. This little X-fighter.
Right.
There's no room to stretch your leg, go to the bathroom, have food. You just crammed into this cockpit. It'd be like flying an F-15 from London to Australia.
So if you go on the opposite side of that spectrum, which is a lot of sci-fi that you just jaunt somewhere quickly, versus a generation ship, which you also have interesting perspectives on, because I think you said in the past that they're impractical, and I'm gonna drill a little bit farther down. Do you see any timeline or any pathway where these are deployed? And I think specifically about James S.A. Corey, the two authors that wrote the Expanse novels, where the Mormonts, they set out on a generation ship, and I could totally see them being utilized in like that type of way, where it's like we're suspending certain, like we have a higher mission we're going towards. But I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more on generation ships.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think if you look historically, you definitely see a precedence for them. So the Pilgrims going to America is the most obvious one. You know, that was a
And look
generation
how
ship.
that turned out. No, I'm just kidding.
You know, they wanted to they wanted their own sort of freedoms. That it was a very puritanical thing. They didn't want a lot of outside interference and things like this. And I don't know for sure, but I suspect that was in the back of the minds of James S.A. Corey writing team when they put together The Expanse and the idea of the Mormons going off. Because, of course, then the Mormons did the same thing within the US. They went out on the trail across to Utah and Salt Lake City and all this. So that, and you know, we've certainly seen lots of examples of things like that where different groups, be it religious or you know, for whatever reason, want to sort of isolate themselves. So when I saw that in the book and I mean, of course, the just amazing TV series, it struck me as entirely plausible that it would happen, and I thought it was a great insight that they brought that into the storyline. So because
So
we just
not
have so many
totally
examples.
impractical. Not totally impractical. If you insert some, like, you know, deeper, longer thought out, like, we have a mission beyond, like, I can see it like out of desperation, like we've got, you know, 50 years before X major event happens, we got to get off the rock. We're just going to throw marbles in that direction. But yeah, so not totally impractical or still pretty impractical.
I think it depends on the purpose. So in Cold Eyes, the crew are clones, and they're growing at the end of the flight. And the reason is you're conserving fuel and you're conserving resources, because you don't have to keep somebody alive for the 80 years to get to the planet. You just need to grow them at the last minute. And you know, so you know, the amount of biological material you need to take is minuscule. So sperm and an egg.
Right, an artificial womb, some von Neumann type, like,
yeah,
probes down the road to kind of see the universe. I love what you're putting down. I need to get this book.
great classic science fiction. And there's a good point to be made that it's a superior model to artificial intelligence, because with artificial intelligence, it's, you know, there is going to be limitations. It's, you know, it's still a machine unless it's really truly has sentience and true intelligence. You know, it's going to be limited in its perspectives. So that's why I went with clones with that one. But I have another story, Galactic Exploration, and that is about generation ships. It's also clones, but they're each generation is cloned, and you know, and it's a way of continuing the knowledge down through the generations. But so I think to answer your question, I think it comes down to the intent of the mission. If the intent of the mission is like the Pilgrims or the Mormons in The Expanse, you know, the journey is as important as the destination.
That's a great point.
And so you have the generation ship because you're cultivating a certain, you know, culture and, you know, value system.
Yeah,
exactly. If it's sort of scientific exploration, then it's more like Cold Eyes, where you're just, you know, you're sending the material, you're saving on those resources, saving on fuel, all that sort of stuff, because, you know, it is just so difficult. And then you're just, you know, setting it up at the end point. But yeah, great question.
Thank you. All right, so I was going through all my notes, the little Audible feature where you're like add note, and I had cliches are the cruelest of lies. I love that line, and you just like inserted it in. I'm not going to give anything away from this book because I'm just going to keep hammering it. It's made its way onto my top 50 sci-fi list, and I'm big on not giving anything away. That's why when I talk about semiosis, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna say anything, but you got to read this book. But what is one of your favorite cliches in science fiction? I'll tell you mine. I'll tell you mine if you need time to come up with yours. The eccentric billionaire. I don't know if you've read Pandora's Star by Peter F. Hamilton, but like Ozzy's one of the best characters in my opinion ever. And it's like, oh, we actually have these now. Okay, it's not even a cliche; it's just the norm now. But anyways, I'm curious for your cliche, your favorite cliche in sci-fi.
It's that aliens are coming to enslave us, or aliens are coming to steal our water, or something like this. Like Tom Cruise released a movie probably about 4 or 5 years ago called Oblivion.
I love that movie.
Oh, me too. The visuals are amazing.
And that is an important distinction. It is a beautifully made film.
Yes. But the idea that aliens would want to steal our water is laughable. You know,
Right.
there's more water on Europa and Enceladus than there is on Earth. You know, and those are just 2 moons sitting there just waiting to be plucked by thirsty aliens.
So if thirsty aliens tickle your fancy, who is it? Stephen Baxter has a short story that's part of a larger series called the Zeely sequence, but it's like a 45-minute short story. But a squid-like alien comes to Earth, and it doesn't just want water, but it's actually a story about trauma, and it is like, it's one of those ones that just insidious. It just kind of like termites your brain for way too long, because it's really a story about trauma. But anyways, Remembrance by Stephen Baxter is a stellar.
I love Stephen Baxter, Alistair Reynolds, Andy Weir. Yeah, I love them. They're fantastic authors.
Okay, so I don't think I've completely exhausted my list, but I wanted to ask if you have any favorite sci-fi books you're reading right now. Doesn't have to be new, doesn't have to be old. I know you mentioned you just jumped back into The Motes and God's Eye. Any other things that have really piqued your interest or that you would recommend folks check out, outside of course, all of the awesome books that you have written?
Yeah, without sort of going to, I would say take a chance on an indie. You know, I'm an indie author, and so I put a lot of my books, well, pretty much all of them, on Amazon, and in particular in the Amazon Kindle universe, which is the Kindle lending library. And it's a great medium because what it does is, you know, you subscribe for, you know, $7, $8 a month or whatever it is, or 80 bucks for the year. But you can then read any of these books. And for unknown authors like myself, for indie authors like myself, what it does is it takes down the barrier to entry. It means that you can pick up a book, you can read a couple of chapters, see if it's going to click for you, and then just go on and read the whole book if you want. And that's helped me immeasurably from the point of view of discovery, where, you know, people will find one book, it'll click for them, and then they'll go back and they'll read several others. So without sort of naming anyone, I would say, you know, if you're part of that KU sort of universe, you know, grab an indie, check out some of the indie authors. It's easy to sort of name drop the big names, and I'm still a bit of a dead tree reader. I like books in paper form, so I've got, yeah, I can see it there in the background.
I've got thousands of sci-fi books behind me, man. I'm team dead tree too, but we're going to pass them on. They're not going to just go to waste. Go ahead.
Yeah. And you know, so like I read Andy Weir's Hail Mary a couple of months ago. I've got Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time that I've sort of started working through. I've got the latest Expanse book is in the list, and it's an easy trap even for me to go with the big names, the trusted names, the safe names, you know, the Baxters, the Reynolds, but yeah, I would just say drop a few indies in there.
Yeah, you need to have a good reading diet. You need an indie authors in your mix.
Yeah.
Well, I can't stress enough. I mean, I think I first heard about you through some subreddits around science fiction. I think it was about 3ZKill specifically, and I immediately was hooked. And then it was just a race to how quickly I could finish it. And I got to give you credit, because at the end, you know, you got your little like thank you to the person that helped me give this research, and thank you to this person that corrected my math on that. And I always love that at the end of a book. But you're like 0.0000001% of people ever leave a review or reach out to me, and I was just like, I'm hitting him up because this book was amazing. And I want other people to learn about it. Last question. What's your favorite solution to the Fermi Paradox?
Oh,
And while you're getting some time, I'm just going to lean on Cicin Liu, The Dark Forest. I am very afraid that if you make too much noise, you put a target on your back, and that's what happens. I know that's not like the definitive answer by any means, but I love that solution to the Fermi Paradox. Oh, there's people out there, but they're smart enough to shut the heck up.
it's a great perspective. I do enjoy sort of thinking about it, and so Cold Eyes is looking at the Fermi Paradox from the perspective that of what I call the great suck, and that is that the reason we don't see aliens spreading throughout the universe is they can't.
Sure.
You know, we look at ourselves as average and normal because life here just seems so plentiful and abundant and so simple. We might be an outlier. You know, Earth might be the kind of planet that just rarely gets life, and we got the benefit of that. And it might be that the super Earths are it's far more common for chemistry to take off on them. This is just spitballing, you know, but and if that was the case, you would have alien species locked in on their planets, waiting for someone like us to come along and drop a space elevator. And that's the premise behind Cold Eyes. When they're first approaching the planet, they're not aware that of all the final metrics, and then they realize these guys are locked in. They need us if they're going to get off. And so part of the debate is, do we really want competition with another intelligent species among the stars? Once we lower that space elevator and give them access to space, the whole paradigm changes, the whole dynamic changes. So one possibility is the great suck, that we're actually an outlier. And if you look at a bell curve, it's the super Earths around long-lived stars like red dwarfs that sort of maybe have most of the life, because there's far more red dwarfs than any other type of star. And so we're just this outlier, and all these other guys are sort of trapped. And so they're there, but they can't move. So that's one. That's the great suck. And again, you know, it wouldn't cover every scenario, but
sure.
And that's where Fermi's paradox may have multiple answers. Another one is the great gloom, and that is that life may have arisen on planets with very, very heavy saturated atmospheres. Think something like Saturn. It's not Saturn, sorry, Venus. And for them, the difference between night and day is just between dark and not quite so dark. And they never get to see the stars. They never get to be inspired by what's out there. And then perhaps, and so I've got thoughts of a future novel of someone that gets a balloon and rises above the clouds and sees the stars for the first time, and they're seen as a heretic and all this sort of stuff. But the great gloom's a possibility. There could be civilizations thriving that just have no interest in space, that everything, and it doesn't have the same sort of appeal to them. We've been able to look at the moon orbiting Earth and wonder about that for tens of thousands of years.
Worked it into all of our religions and all of our cultural norms.
People worship the sun, worship the moon, worship
they use it to eat. They use it as a marker. They use it as a marker to understand when they should plant crops.
Exactly. So how does a culture develop if it has none of that access? So the great gloom's a possibility. Another one is that and this is the one I think is most plausible, and it's probably most depressing.
All right, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
And that is just the sheer size.
Sure.
So in my novel, Galactic Exploration, it's about 3 starships that go in 3 different directions in our galaxy. One goes in towards the core, one goes up above the galactic plane, and one goes out towards the outskirts, and they're looking for life. And but one of the points that's raised in it is that it's called the Serengeti Principle. If you go to the Serengeti, life is everywhere. We're kind of assuming our galaxy should be like the Serengeti. And so we look in all these different directions and we go, where is everybody? but
Sure.
we may have evolved in the equivalent of the polar regions. There may be other galaxies out there that are like the Serengeti. And that's what you see in Star Wars, where you've got all these planets, all this life, and all these different competing alien cultures and stuff like that. But we assume we're in the Serengeti. We might actually be in the polar regions, and there's
Yeah.
just us, a couple of penguins, and the odd narwhal in our particular galaxy.
Well, and you know, I think it makes me think of Werner Vinge's Zones of Thought series, you know, where there's certain parts of the cosmos that faster than light travel is allowed because the physics are different there. And we're just, some societies rise up in, you know, slow zones, and others, you know, like the ones you described. I do have to say, you touched on one of my favorite topics, which is I firmly believe, with just nothing but blind faith, that there's stuff floating around in Venus. Because I just have, like, Ben Bova, I don't know if you've ever read Ben Bova's
Yeah,
Grand Tour, but his book on Venus, I was like, there's gotta be something floating around in those gases. And then my second favorite, completely blind faith, not, we haven't gotten anything in there yet to really give us an idea, but Enceladus, like, crack under that.
oh
I want
yes.
to see what's swimming around down there, and people are going to be laughing when it's as much closer than we ever kind of presumed.
Well, and that's a good example of how science is very progressive in terms of its understanding. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, the solar system was looking really bleak. And then we had the flyby of Voyager, which first saw the plumes around, I think it was Enceladus, it might have been Europa. But, and that sort of, you know, hinted at some of these things. Recently, SpaceX was awarded a contract to launch a mission to, I believe it's Europa around Jupiter, specifically looking for signs of life. And as much as I love Elon Musk and what he's doing with Starship, it's phenomenally out of the box thinking and incredibly aggressive. You know, the idea of landing the rockets is just revolutionized space travel.
You mean I don't have to just build a car, drive it once, and never drive it again? That's not a viable economic model for getting somewhere. Build a plane, fly it somewhere, and leave it there, or throw parts off of it while I'm flying it somewhere. That isn't that's sustainable to getting out of our gravity well.
It seems so obvious now, doesn't it? But the obsession with Mars, I want to see people on Mars. I think that'd be remarkable, and you know, and I think over time you will get cities and stuff. The reality is, though, if you look at Antarctica as an analog, you know, life is incredibly difficult there. You know, life on Mars, it's not going to be the stuff of science fiction. It is going to be the harshest environment humans have ever lived on. It's going to make Antarctica look like Hawaii by comparison.
Right. We'll have really interesting, like, Martian Inuit, like, just like the kind of culture that we'll have to birth out. They'll be calling us squanderers.
Yes, yes. Well, and they're going to be a below ground species. The radiation bombarding the surface is going to mean surface trips are going to be very limited. You're going to be in lava caves, but you know, I'd love to see him sort of pushing that, you know, pushing that envelope as he is, but not just pushing it for human space flight, but pushing it for more probes. You know, get something to Enceladus, get something to Europa. You know, let's start looking for signs of life where we've got really good chances of potentially finding something. And you know, the old adage, you can chew gum and walk at the same time. It doesn't mean don't go for Mars, but it does mean, you know, just broaden things a little bit, because some of the scientific discoveries that could happen there are just phenomenal. And the challenge with the outer planets like Jupiter and Saturn is the time frames that the missions have to be run over. You know, missions that are planned now won't get to the planet till 2040, 2050.
Don't say this. It makes me sad, man. I just keep hoping that the private sector, that some of these billionaires just be like, I'm all in. Let's just accelerate this process even faster. I was, you know, slight aside, but I think it's in theme with this. I was looking at engagement rings this week, and I was like, my fiance was like, what do you want on your engagement ring? And I was like, I want meteorite. Like I want something
Yeah.
cool. And I thought I was being like completely outlandish and like I'm unique. And I go into the jeweler, a local jeweler, and they're like, yeah, we have meteorite rings. Yeah, here they are. And they showed it to me and I Googled it and I was like, I don't know if I like had a targeted ad and this is, but I keep thinking about what changes the value proposition and the math to make this stuff profitable. And I'm like, you know what I'd really like? An Enceladus wedding ring. Like what, like how do we get like people to actually fund and buy things and want to you know, become that ridiculous movie where they send the oil rig guys up and to save
Armageddon.
yeah, but like what happens when we start lassoing, you know, asteroids that have all the stuff that goes in iPhones? Like when the math starts working there, it gets really exciting.
Well, this is where I think Elon and Jeff Bezos, if there can be some collaboration, there's great ideas on both sides. You tend to get people that, you know, Elon's wonderful, Jeff Bezos is rubbish, or the reverse, you know, Blue Origin, what's
It's almost like
SpaceX
people are
doing?
complicated and they're not.
Tribal, who knew?
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, any billionaire
whereas,
out there, if they want to spend money trying to get us into space, I will still hope they pay their taxes, but I will be excited to see what sort of things they fund in space.
well, this is where the combining some of the approaches really stands to give a lot of results. So, for example, you know, to get to the moon, SpaceX has to launch into orbit, has to have a orbital refueling station, and then needs 10 flights of other starships just to drag the fuel up. So that tells you where the problem lies: fuel and getting it into orbit. So you've got to be thinking, okay, what other possible solutions are there? And this is where Jeff Bezos has a vision of mining in space. And I think that that is really where the next step is. You know, people talk about mining into space and how, you know, if you mine the asteroid Psyche, I think it is, it's the, you know, NASA suspects it's the failed core of a planet from the beginning of the solar system. And so it's just this dense, mineral rich
4 billion-old opportunity.
yeah, yeah, and you know, and it would crash the world's economy if all the metals were returned. But people are thinking too small. Don't return the metals. This is how you start your expanse style space economy.
Right.
You. Why lift fuel from Earth? That has got to be the dumbest idea in history.
Right.
You know,
And then
let's spend.
there's the elephant in the room, which is fusion's been 10 years away every 10 years, right? So what happens when you get, or if we waive the nuclear treaty and we start doing little nuclear blasts on the back of our ships, you know, like.
Well, if you start building things in space and mining in space, all of a sudden the nuclear concerns are irrelevant. The amount of radiation you're going to emit relative to what's there is just pitiful. So this is where I think, you know, mining even on the moon, but asteroids for things like fuel is really where we'll sort of make the leap. And that's where, you know, sort of a hybrid model, taking the best of the SpaceX Starship approach and taking some of those ideas from Blue Origin, is what we'll eventually end up with. It's just a question of when the two sort of rationales come together. But loading a rocket up with fuel and launching it and losing 90% of that fuel to get 10% of it to a refueling station is madness. To go back to your car analogy, you'd never do it.
Right. It's one of those things that we'll laugh at later. Like the same way that we laugh now, we'll laugh, you know, 10, 15 years from now when there's another breakthrough. Yeah. All right. So I got to say that this was such a privilege and it's been so exciting. You've got me sufficiently hyped for Cold Eyes. I've got to catch up on some of your other books that I've already ordered, but I got to give you credit. The narration to some of yours on Audible, doing the samples, I'm really excited. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from today was just check out indie authors. You know, ask yourself, do you know a sci-fi author, an Australian sci-fi author? If the answer is no, there's a lot of people out there writing quality stuff. So any last words for the folks watching?
Oh, thank you for listening to me waffle on, and it's a joy to be part of the podcast. And I'll get back to the States at some point once all this pandemic is behind us, and I'd love to come and see your store.
Hey, that's the goal. And until then, stay safe and keep producing really creative, awesome first contact and everything in between sci-fi. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye.